all this is about. So that looks okay. Yeah, that looks okay. So I've got that's sitting there. Everything's copacetic with that. So I probably would actually pull this guy down a little bit. Now you got to remember, I'm trying to make sure that my map camera, you know, is the one that's matching up. Because what I could really do at this point, I could go back in here and go to the options. So go back to my viewport options, and I could just turn off. I could just remove my actual background camera, because I don't really need the background camera, because what I'm using is the actual projection. Now I actually am going to keep my background camera on, because that helps me to know where my objects are at and what I need to map to what to see where and everything else. So I'm going to turn that back on. I'm going to go back in here, configure viewports, and just go back and get my file again. Let's go back to the desktop, and there's my file, and then say apply to active view. So this is why I use this in here, but realistically there'll come a time where you'll get rid of that, because you'll have what you need as far as what you want mapped onto everything. So I'm going to map my back wall. I'm just going to make myself a plane. So I'm going to drag out a plane just in here. Actually, let's just make a plane. So I'm just going to make a plane in here, and I'm going to rotate this plane. So I'm going to get my rotate tool. So you can rotate this by hand, but if you look at the very bottom, up right below your timeline, you actually have your X, Y, and Z values, and depending on what gizmo you have selected. So right now I have my rotate tool selected. These are my rotational values. If this were my translate tool, these would be translational values. So I'm just going to go in here and do 90 to rotate it up on Y. And let's get this, let's pull it back behind my capsule and pull it back here like that. And then let's pull it up and you can see it actually matches the perspective of that wall. That's why we were trying to set up our camera match in the beginning, so we can get it to match that wall. So I'm going to hit Alt X so I can see through it, go to my modify panel, and I'm just going to change the length of this just to stretch it out, and change my width of it. I'm just going to pull it down just like that. So now I actually have a back wall, something to catch my back wall. So I can do the same thing. I don't even have to modify this, because it's just a plane, right? So I can just have that way, and I'm going to come in here and get my modifier, get my camera map modifier, go here to pick camera, hit the H key, click on my camera, click pick, and then let's un-X-ray that. I'm going to hit the M key to get my material editor to come up, and I'm just going to take this same image and drag this to my material editor and drop it. So now that actually is the background that I want in there. So what's going on at this point is that I'm getting these things to match up the way that I need them to match. So this actually works really well. This is really kind of cool, because what's going to happen is once I take this stuff out, right now I'm just modeling. I'm modeling based off of the images that I have. So you're basically using the images from the perspective that you can see, and you're modeling your pieces. The last thing I really have to do, I really need to do some more work to the back, because I've got, you know, a lot of these pieces in the background. I've got this this scaffolding back here. I want to get some of that really cool stuff in there. And then I also want to be able to get my actual character. I want to get her in there as well. And now I'm not going to do a detailed model. You don't have to do a detailed model. You just want to have something that has enough geometry on it so that you can capture the actual three-dimensional look of the girl. That's really all you want. So that's all I really need. So I can click into this viewport. I'm going to hit G to get rid of my grid. I don't really need to see my grid, because I know my grid is all set up. You have to make sure that you do not move that camera 001 once you have set it. Once you set that camera, do not move it, because you're using that to project your pieces onto your models. And in the end, we're going to end up baking all of this information onto our 3D model. So if I go here and I render this view right here, we can see this is what we've modeled so far. So I've got this model piece here. So this is in 3D now. The capsule's in 3D. This piece appears in 3D. She's not in 3D yet. My plane didn't show up, but I just suspect that's because my plane is turned the wrong way. So I just think that it's probably my plane is actually turned the opposite way. So I'm just going to go in here and get a normal. Let's go get a normal. Put that on there, and let's see if I render it now. So let's see if I go in here and render this now. So yeah, you can see now that I've put the normal. My normals are flipped because you got to remember, a plane only has normals on one side of the plane. So if you look right now, if I put this normal modifier on here, it's basically flipped the plane the other way. So now the normal's showing up, and now I can actually see my wall back there and see the pieces of this the way that's supposed to be. Now you have to remember, when you're doing this in 3D, you're not gonna be able to walk around your full model. If I look at this in VR, because this is going to be made for VR, as I look at this in VR, I'll be able to rotate probably about this much and see this much of my model. I will not be able to walk all the way around my model. I'll be able to kind of look at it from a little bit of an angle, kind of like that. Like that's really what I'm going to be able to see from my angles. Like that's kind of it. So, but it'll give a really cool look because I'll have this stuff broken out into three-dimensional pieces that I can actually then do some depth of field on and change the focus of things, and then be able to kind of tweak some things out, which is going to be really cool. So that's really it. So to model her, I'm going to do the same thing. I'll end up using like a cylinder and making the shapes for her legs, and but I'll make sure that it's one object. I'm actually start with the box and just use the box and kind of get a little bit of the things that are going on with her body, and be able to map her onto that 3D object as well. But that's really it. I'm just using the image and building off of the image and building my stuff in here. Remember, do not move the camera 001. Once you've made it, once you have done perspective match on it, you need to leave that camera alone. You can still have your traditional perspective camera and move it around. So if you see this camera in your viewport right here, this little camera right here, do not move this guy. This is that camera 001, and if you move it, you're going to change your whole shot and your whole scene, and that's not what you want to do. So you make sure you just don't move it. Just don't touch it. I've gotten to the point where I'm really good about just not touching it. So I can go back here to my create panel. I'll go in here and I will start to make cylinders, and I'm going to make myself a cylinder right here and just make a little small cylinder, and I'm going to drag this up, and what I'm going to do is just move this back in my scene right about here, and then move this over right here, pull a little bit forward. And only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my modify panel, and let's just change the radius of this, make it smaller, so it's right about like that, and then let's just pull it down like right here and make my radius a little bit smaller, so something like that. So now that's in place. I could duplicate it, so I could clone this. To clone inside of here is pretty easy. All you have to do is click on your object, hold down the shift key, and just drag out your next object, and it clones it. And it'll ask you, do you want to clone it? Just say, yes, I want to clone it. And I can change the height of this one, push it all the way up. So there it goes. It's going to go up towards the ceiling. And then I'll hold down shift and drag back another one, like right about here. And what I'll do is I'll just push my image back a little bit more. So I've got some kind of separation between these guys. So this one's going to be right about there and over here. And I'll probably make myself a box that will capture all of this for where this stuff is at. So I'll just go back in here and say make box. So there's my box right there. Get it. Let's move it. Let's move it back in space. Get it up in the air. Let's get it back, 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 back. We want to intersect this stuff. And I'm going to get my rotate tool and just rotate this at that angle. Now, if the shadow's giving you issues, come here to where it says realistic. Click on realistic, left mouse click on realistic, and just go to shaded. It'll turn off the shadows in the viewport, which is actually very helpful. You really don't want to see the shadows. You don't really need them. So I've got that. I'm just going to come back in here and map this, or get this at the right angle rather. Let's pull this up here like that. Let's rotate a little bit more, and then let's pull this down a little bit. So I'm going to right click on this and actually go to convert to and say convert to editable poly. Go to polygon mode, grab this polygon right here. Now if you've got an angle and this is really hard to work with, you can come up here to where it says view at and just change this thing right here to say local. Now it'll be on the local direction that you want to move it on, like that. And you can do the same thing up here. So just grab this one. It'll move across the local axis of that particular object. So I'm going to come back here, come back to out of editable poly mode, go to my modifier list, get my camera mapping, say pick, hit the H key, get my pick menu, pick the camera, hit pick, right? And then remember I also need to open up my material editor again. So my material editor is sitting down here, and I'm just going to grab this output and drag it onto my staircase object right now. So now I've got that staircase object, and there's my staircase object. It's in there too. So I'm going to go back and clean up some other things on this. The thing I'm going to clean up is this guy right here. I'm going to come in here and go back to polygon mode just really quick. Grab this polygon, just move this a little bit forward a little bit. Turn on show end result so it shows me the right thing, and then come out of this, and then I've got that. So I'm going to go ahead and get all my poles at one time. So get all my poles. Just click them all. And I'm going to come in here and choose camera map for all of these. So now these all have a camera. They should all have a camera mapping on them. So I'm going to go pick the camera. Go to the next guy over here, and that should have the same thing, and that should, so all three of them should have the same thing. I'm going to go back to my slate material editor, and I'm just going to select all of my poles, so hold control and just be able to select them all. And then I can also right click on a material. I can right click on a material and say assign material to selection, and then just do it that way. So that way also works as well. So now I've got real poles in there. I've got real geometry for this. This is kind of working. If your projection is starting to skew a little bit, like this looks a little skewed with these lines, they don't look vertical anymore, you need more geometry in that object. So I can come in here and go to edge mode, and I'll just select across this, and I'm going to go here and where it says connect, and I'm going to click on the settings for connect, and you can see the minute I added in more segments, my projection actually got cleaner. So I can just put in some more segments like that, and then hit the checkbox, and now you'll see that that does not give me the same kind of distortion that was happening up there. So if you're getting distortion, then that means that your object doesn't have enough topology in it. Same thing's happening with this guy. So I'm going to go here to edge mode, and I'm going to get my edges going around it this way. So I'm just going to rotate this in perspective over here. So I'm going to get my edges that are going this way around this, and I'm going to just go in here and do the same thing. Do connect, go to settings for connect, and just bring in some more edges. So I'll just bring in more edges in here. Just cleans this up. Hit the checkbox. Now this geometry is still very low poly. The geometry in here is not that high definition and high poly yet. It's still very low poly geometry. So keep that in mind as well. Nothing that I have in here yet is that high poly. So that's really it. That's how we end up mapping the objects onto or the images onto our camera, from our camera onto our objects. Now, in the subsequent videos, we will talk about how you can be able to save this projection data onto your model and basically have it unwrapped from the camera's perspective and be able to do it that way. And we will talk about that in our next video.